This People's Tribunal was convened in Toronto 14 years after the arrest and detention of Gerardo Hernandez, Ramon Labañino, Antonio Guerrero, Fernando González Llor, and René González in the United States. After considering all the evidence before this People's Tribunal, we find that there is an overwhelming and compelling body of evidence as to the activity of terrorist groups in southern Florida, groups which have planned and executed terrorist actions against the people of Cuba for decades in contravention of US and international law. We find that every country has the right to defend itself, and in that context, the Cuban Five acted in the least adversarial and non-harmful manner to try to prevent acts of terrorism without engaging in actions against the national security of the United States. We find that the United States government failed to take any action to prosecute the actual terrorists in southern Florida. We find that men that are peacefully trying to prevent terrorism should not be in prison. This People's Tribunal condemns the cruel and unwarranted treatment of the five during their incarceration. We find the trial was a political trial against the Cuban Five. We find there was no credible evidence to support a conviction of conspiracy to commit espionage against the Cuban Five. We find that there was no credible evidence to support a conviction of conspiracy to commit murder against Gerardo Hernandez. We find that the US government interfered in the trial by spending a considerable amount of money to pay reporters to write over 1,000 printed articles and other TV and radio coverage, amounting to propaganda which had the unequivocal effect of influencing the outcome of the trial. We find the court's decision to deny the motion for change of venue to be patently unreasonable in light of jury intimidation and a pervasive environment of hostility against the five in Miami. Therefore, this People's Tribunal concludes that the Cuban Five were unjustly detained, unjustly prosecuted, and unjustly sentenced, all contrary to international and US domestic law, including the United States Constitution. This People's Tribunal proposes that the convictions be quashed and that Gerardo Hernandez, Ramon Labañino, Antonio Guerrero, Fernando González Llor, and René González be set free immediately without any restrictions on their liberty. In the interest of justice and healing, this People's Tribunal proposes that the President of the United States should exercise his prerogative of a presidential clemency and allow the five to return home. Free the five now! Free the five now! Free the five now!
So I was one of the magistrates, and we basically came to the conclusion that their arrests, their detention, their trial, and their incarceration is not just. We call for my government to immediately release them based on a lot of evidence that we heard this weekend, especially that there was not a change of venue and there was jury intimidation, and even casual observers would know they wouldn't get a fair trial in Miami. And then the documents proving that journalists were paid, thousands of dollars to write propaganda paid by the U.S. government is very important. So we said that they should be released immediately, if not released immediately and returned to Cuba, at least given presidential clemency, and then returned to Cuba. I intimately connect this struggle to my son being killed in Iraq. My son was told, we were told, the country was told, the world was told that our troops were going to the Middle East, Iraq, and Afghanistan to fight terrorism. And so allegedly my son was over there fighting terrorism. Of course, he was killed by an Iraqi who was against the occupation of his country. And the Cuban Five were arrested in the United States trying to protect Cuba and the United States and the other countries of the world from terrorism, from these Cuban terrorist cells in Miami. So that's how I intimately connect the case with what I do. But in a wide way, whenever I speak about the case, I always say I want freedom for the political prisoners, the Cuban Five, and all political prisoners. The United States has a lot of political prisoners, but around the world, of course, there's many people unjustly incarcerated.